Good morning, everyone. Thank you for making the time on your Wednesday mornings to join us here for the Community Development Grant Small webinar that will go through this grant. This is a Department of Planning and Development production. We will give everyone a minute to trickle in before we go ahead and get started. Okay, I think we have a good quorum here. We can go ahead and kick this off. Just some quick ground rules and how to go about asking us questions. So once again, thanks everyone for coming here. You'll see at the bottom of your screen, there's going to be a Q&A function. What we'll do is answer all the questions that are in there at the end of the presentation. So as we go along through these slides that we're going to present over the next few minutes, if there's anything that kind of raises a question for you, please feel free to put into the Q&A function. Members of the team here will go through those questions and pick out a few that are going to be pertinent for the whole group to answer. If there's anything more specific that you'd like to go through, we'll give a reminder again at the end, but there'll be an email address at the end of the presentation that you can shoot over any specific questions, and the team here will be happy to answer them regarding your specific situation. Well, welcome everyone. We'll go ahead and get started with some introductions. Hannah, would you like to get us started here?
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us. I'm Hannah Jones. I'm the director of our economic recovery and our bond funder programs here at the Department of Planning and Development, which includes the grant that we're walking through today, which is our small program for the community development grants, a reimbursement-based grant that pays for capital improvement expenses to your space up to $250,000. And I'll turn it over to you, Patrick.
Great. My name is Patrick Liao. I'm part of a team here for Guidehouse that has been helping to be the project administrator for this grant over the last few years. This is the 6th round of funding that we've had. I believe that's right. So very excited to have everyone here. And we will be, me and my team will be working with you over the next few months and years for successful applicants to make your projects into a reality. Kenny Larson is my colleague. I'll hand it over to him for some brief introductions as well.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Kenny Larson. I work with Patrick on the Guidehouse team. I specialize in all of our awardees that are through the CDGS program. So hopefully we'll get a chance to meet each and every one of you a little bit more in depth, but otherwise I think we can get started.
Great. And here too are my colleagues, Alex and Elisa. If you're in this program, you'll be hearing a lot more from them. And they'll be helping at the end as well to answer your questions. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get started then. For some quick program overview, this is the 2025 round 2. That's kind of an internal designation, but glad to have everyone here. And as Hannah mentioned, these are for grants up to $250,000. What exactly that means, what the breakdown is between the city grant funding and what you will be bearing as the project owner, we'll get into in just a couple slides. But yes, the maximum grant award here is $250,000 for your construction rehab work. Next slide. So just going through, this is, if there's any, just one slide you want to take away from this, this is probably the main one. What this program is designed to do is, we're an established grant program at this point. And the DPD aims to support and catalyze local developments throughout the city of Chicago. And so taking vacant storefronts, vacant land, helping to upgrade building assets that, need that capital work, and provide good jobs throughout the city of Chicago. There's a long list of eligible expenses and projects that you will be able to fund with this grant. We'll get into more detail, but I think broadly speaking, if you're an existing business, if you're a new business, If you are the owner of a space that's looking to do a vanilla box in order to attract a new tenant in, all of those are, good models of projects that we have funded in the past. This $250,000 grant funding is able to cover up to 75% of eligible expenses. And so the remaining 25% will be borne by the project itself. We'll get into what exactly eligible and non-eligible costs are. You're gonna hear this a lot over the next half hour or so. This is a reimbursement-based grant, and so we don't want to leave anyone under the impression that you're going to be getting the money and then you'll be doing the work after. I think on an ongoing basis, the project will front the money up front, and then eligible expenses will be paid back by the city once you've submitted all the required documentation showing that these are expenses that you've actually paid out, and so on and so forth. We do want to make sure that these projects don't stretch out for years and years. So selected projects must be completed within 2 years of the orientation when you are actually inducted into the program. And you must maintain it for an additional 3 years after that by the terms of the contract that you'll receive. Also, if you are a project that's already on the cusp of finishing, or you've already substantially built out this construction, you would not be a good fit for this program. Any work completed within 6 months prior to the orientation will not be considered eligible for this grant funding. Next slide. Okay, so all of this is just recapping kind of what I said above, but this is the overall grant structure that all awardees will be subject to. There'll be your total project cost. The city will pay up to $250,000, and a maximum of 75% of your total costs. And so if you have a $2 million project, you'll be bearing a greater portion of that. But for all eligible costs, the city's going to be bearing up to 75% of those, up to $250,000. We'll help you, walk through just like what the split is between the city and yourself once you submit your costs, once you're accepted into the program. But this is kind of the big picture that everyone will be dealing with here. I will stress it is critically important for you to accurately capture your costs as best as you can in your application. What exactly the grant award is that you'll be receiving is determined by your application at this stage. So, we don't want you to get accepted in spring 2026 and then come back to us in 2027 saying we're the scope of the project or what exactly your itemized costs are radically different from what you submitted in your application. So this initial application you're doing is critically important moving forward. Last thing here, strong applicants will be able to demonstrate that you're able to finance up to 50% of the total project cost. And so even though the city is going to be able to pay you back up to 75%, we want to make sure that you have the bridge funding to get through this reimbursement pays portion of your construction. So if you have more in cash reserves to demonstrate that it's like, yes, okay, you can get through that construction period, that will demonstrate to us that you are ready to kind of hit the ground running and that you are a good fit for this grant program. Next, we'll go through what eligibility is. I think this is going to be not a very, we're not going to put a ton of restrictions on who's eligible for this award. I think primarily, if you take anything away from this, you need to be within the city of Chicago. Your project needs to be within the city of Chicago and be revenue generating. That means that you're allowed to kind of have a mixed use component to it, but the primary focus here is on the commercial portion of a project, and residential expenses can't be cannot exceed 25% of the total grant amount. And all the work that you're doing to your say you have a mixed use building, 2 floors, this grant will fund the larger building wide systems and improvements. And otherwise, the vast majority of our grants are purely commercial storefronts, offices, et cetera, that have that revenue generating component. We're able to kind of work with you if you have a land acquisition, you'd like to kind of use this grant funding to purchase a vacant lot, for example. Um, if that's kind of describes your project, reach out to us and we can discuss a little bit more what that land acquisition looks like. Otherwise, new construction on a vacant site, vanilla box projects, like I mentioned earlier, where you're looking to attract a new tenant, all of those are eligible projects within the confines of this grant program. Next. What then is ineligible? If you are a nonprofit organization that provides some kind of social service function to your community, that where it doesn't have that revenue generating component, that would make you ineligible for this grant funding. If you are a religious, place of worship, that will, that typically is not a good fit for this program. If there's heavy industry or if you're generally non-revenue generating, all of those are ineligible as well. If you are based out of a home address, and so you're starting up a small business, but you're doing it from your house to your apartment, again, that's ineligible. If there's some sort of nexus with the government, so if you are, you're looking to do some improvements on your local park district location, those would be ineligible. If this is going to be an extended period of construction where you don't expect to be done with your project until say 2029, that would not be a good fit. And if the same scope of works already received another DPD grant, or if your business as a whole has received another DPD grant over the last 3 years, you would not be eligible for this. I think it's hard to go through every single edge case here. And so if you have any questions about whether you're eligible or not, please reach out to the email address listed on the bottom of the screen at dpdgrants@cityofchicago.org. Okay, and before I hand it over to my colleague, so I'm just going to quickly go through what are some expenses that are eligible versus ineligible. I think overall, what you would traditionally think of as a build out of your storefront, your business, exterior, interior renovations, your roof needs needs to be replaced. The parking lot needs kind of dramatic improvements. All of those renovations are eligible for this. Architecture and design costs, engineering, demolition, disposal, all of those construction fees are eligible. Masonry, windows, doors, the physical items that are being put in, those are eligible expenses, as well as kind of the stuff behind the walls. And so HVAC, electrical, plumbing. Again, all of this as a whole, ADA accessibility improvements as well. All of these as a whole, just what you typically think of as the construction that you would need to do to kind of get a storefront up and running, your business up and running. All of those would be eligible expenses. Ineligible ones is a shorter list, but basically anything that's a furniture, fixture, equipment that could be removed from the space. All of those are not going to be included within your eligible costs. As well as improvements that only impact the residential component of your mixed-use project. Again, we've seen kind of everything under the sun here about what, is this a fixture or is this like a permanent improvement to the space? We are happy to kind of work it through with you in case you have any questions. But I think as a shorthand, what we typically say is pretend you take your storefront, you flip it upside down. Anything that falls down and could be removed from the space would not be an eligible cost for this grant program here. The last thing I want to mention here is that the general contractors that you hire to do this work, you will need to make sure that they're licensed by the City of Chicago and have an active insurance policy. We will review all of your costs for eligibility in your application. So, any edge cases we'll get into there. Okay, last thing I just quickly want to mention, hiring an owner's rep. This is something that, you can elect to do. I would say the majority of our projects do not have an owner's rep. But if you'd like to kind of, say you have a bakery and you'd like to open up a new bakery to serve your neighborhood, I think you have the expertise to kind of really, bake some really great pastries and really great cakes, but you don't have any kind of prior experience in, constructing a brand new business. You are able to hire an owner's rep. These are professionals who are dedicated to kind of advocating for your construction project from, ideation through the actual completion of the construction, and allow you to kind of focus on your own specific areas of expertise. And so, this whole list of things that they are able to do. Owner's rep, again, not critical, but is an eligible cost and may be included within the budget of your project here. Okay, I see we have some questions coming in. Once again, we'll attend to all the items in the Q&A at the end of this presentation. But for right now, I'll hand it over to Kenny, who will be going through the application process and what strong applications are and what we'll be looking for in the many applications to be reviewing after the deadline on February 13th.
All righty. Thank you, Patrick. Let's go ahead and get started. So the first phase we'll be talking about of our application review is readiness and feasibility. At a top level, DPD prioritizes projects that have done the work that's necessary to demonstrate they are ready to begin construction. So what specifically does that entail? Well, first, we'll be looking for an itemized budget that's supported by a city licensed contractor's bid. This is important because the costs that you provide in your application will directly inform the size of your grant award. So please make sure that these are as accurate as possible. We'll also be looking to see if you have any design documentations from an architect that's licensed. Additionally, we also look toward proof of financing. This is something I'll cover in a few more slides, but generally speaking, one of the strongest signs that our applications show is that at least 50% of the total project cost listed in your application, you do already have financing secured for, not including this prospective grant award. If you don't have those funds secured already, a plan to secure that financing or information about how you intend to do so is also very helpful. We'll also look to see detailed business plans. Depending on how long your business has been in operation, whether it's a startup or something new, we'll look to see profit or loss statements if you're already in operation, or a detailed plan on how your business is going to operate in the event that it's a startup. We'll also look to see tax documentation. One thing I like to note during these presentations is that we're looking for tax documentation specifically from your legal entity, so the business or nonprofit that's going to be applying to receive the grant, not your individual tax return as the applicant that's filling out the application. Next thing we'll talk about here is site control. This is very important and actually is one of the requirements of this grant program once you are selected and before you receive those reimbursements that Patrick was talking about earlier. All finalists and awardees that are accepted for this grant program must have secured site control for the project site that their construction is occurring at. Now, this doesn't mean you have to own the property, although of course a deed is totally acceptable. It can also mean that you have a long-term lease at a property as well. You can see what the three different forms of site control that we typically see during the application process are. The first is an executed lease. This should be for the project site, and the lessor should be the business's, or rather the lessee should be the business's legal name. So again, that legal entity that you are filling out your application on behalf of. You can also have a deed as well that shows that you currently own the project site that your construction will be occurring at. If you don't have that at this point, but you still want to show at least some form of site control, we typically recommend submitting a letter of intent for the project location. This should be an executed letter of intent signed by both the intended lessor and the lessee, again, using that name of the business or legal entity that you're submitting your application on behalf of. So as I mentioned, I do want to spend a few minutes talking about project financing. This is one of the sections of the application that we tend to get a lot of questions about. So I do want to start just, very high level first off. One of the requirements of this grant program when you are selected is that you will need to have at least 50% of your total project costs in secured financing. Again, this does not include either the grant award if you are awarded or does not include a prospective grant award when you're filling out your application. So as you are filling out that project financing table, which I'll show you an image of in just a moment here, please make sure you do not include the grant award or prospective grant award in that anticipated financing. In terms of what specifically we look for, we want to see evidence of that project financing. This could take a lot of forms. For example, some folks choose to have a line of credit. Some folks will also have a loan of some sort from a financial institution or lender showing that they have those funds. Some folks already have the money in a bank account or a business bank account or an investment account that they can use to show financing. So we ask you to provide, some combination of a variety of sources. It does not need to all be in one joint account, but we do need to see that the sum of the proof of financing that you're providing does add up to at least 50% of those total project costs. One question we often get is, what if I don't have 50% at this point? Is it okay if I have slightly yes? The general answer to this question is there's not one particular factor that determines whether or not your application is accepted or declined. So if you only have 49% of your total project financing, you can still submit an application. Just note that it won't be as strong as if you have 50% of your total project financing secured. So that's generally our recommendation, and we'll even show some examples of what that project financing portion of the application looks like here on the next slide. So you can see here kind of at the top left and the bottom right, we have two contrasting examples of how to fill out that project financing question on the application. As you'll note on the top section here, acceptable examples will have evidence attached, such as a screenshot of a bank account showing that you have the funds. Maybe it's a letter from a bank saying that you have secured a loan for your project. We also will look to see that the cumulative total of the variety of proof of financing methods you show total at or above 50% of the total project cost in your application. On the bottom section here, you can see what some common pitfalls that folks often fall into are. Unacceptable examples include not providing a sufficient level of detail. So for example, you can see that line that says personal checking/savings account with $75,000. There's not really any evidence or screenshot that's attached showing that you currently have those funds in your bank account. You'll also note that the funding isn't, secured at this point for some of the line items in that table. And so as a result, that can also constitute insufficient detail. Lastly, I'll also mention here, you can see in that bottom table that this hypothetical applicant did list the grant from the city of Chicago as anticipated financing. Again, please do not include that in your table. We will not be counting it toward your project financing. So we are looking specifically for forms of financing that do not include the prospective grant award. So I want to circle back and sort of briefly kind of build upon this topic of financing by discussing your project budget. You might be wondering, how are my total project costs calculated? How is my grant award going to be calculated if I'm accepted for this grant program? The answer is actually it's based on the project costs that are submitted in your application. My colleague Patrick spent some good time talking about what are considered eligible costs and ineligible costs for this grant program. But the costs that you list in your project budget will directly go on to inform how much money is allocated for your grant during the application review process. So this is determined by the eligible itemized expenses that you list in the project budget portion of your application. Please note that the specific dollar amounts that are tied to those costs do actually have an impact on your grant award. Let's say hypothetically that in your initial application, your cumulative eligible cost adds up to $200,000. Maybe you haven't talked to your general contractor yet. Maybe that's just a rough guess. And by the time you do, a few months later, you realize the cost is actually $220,000 in eligible costs. Well, when we review your application, all we see is that $200,000 figure of eligible costs. And so as a result, that's the figure that we use to determine what your grant award will be. So please make sure that these costs are as accurate as possible. It really does go a long way in ensuring that your grant can be as helpful for you as possible. Now, another common question we get here is, well, okay, what if my contractor tells me that my costs have gone up after I obtained a bid at the point of the application? Well, to counteract that, we strongly recommend that you ask your contractor to include a contingency line item within your construction bid. This allows an additional 10% of your eligible project construction costs to be added to your project budget table up to the $250,000 cap. That way, if your costs do come in higher, you can count that overage against the contingency. So functionally, what the contingency line item offers is for any capital improvement costs that you have connected to your project, if there is an overage of up to 10% of your total project costs, or there's that cost increase, you will still be covered by the grant award. So please make sure that you include that line item and be thoughtful about, sort of the costs that you're listing in your project budget. You can even see here what an example of a successful project budget are. You can see that, again, the cost estimates here are very detailed. They're accurate. They're based off of the contractor's bid that the applicant provided. You can see that they are, again, supported with that supplementary documentation. And you can also see here that the line items are sufficiently detailed. One of the most common things that we see in applications is, somebody will list, $200,000 construction costs. Well, it's not really clear, what the actual specific construction costs are. Whereas, as you can see in this table, they have $7,800 for walls specifically, $1,500 for floors specifically, and that's how they get to that cumulative amount. So please make sure that you're using a sufficient amount of line itemization when you are filling out this budget table. One other quick note I'll make, if you do have any design or construction documentation at this time, it's always going to be helpful to include that in your application. So maybe that means you've already gotten some preliminary drawings or visualizations from an architect. Great, we'd love to see those. If you have a construction bid from a general contractor, again, that's super helpful. It only strengthens your application and shows us that you have put in the due diligence necessary to make sure your project is ready to hit the ground running as soon as you are selected. So the last sort of portion I'll talk about here before we move into the next steps is just kind of a holistic overview of the application review process. Generally speaking, there are 4 stages of application review that our team will go through to determine which applications are selected for funding. The first stage here is readiness. So how do you demonstrate readiness specifically? Well, as we talked about earlier, we'll be looking to see whether you have site control documentation. Is it a deed? Is it an executed lease? Is it a letter of intent? Is it nothing? We'll look to see that your project budget and construction timeline are detailed and realistic. Again, as Patrick mentioned, we want to make sure that your construction will not already be fully completed by the time of acceptance. So, make sure that if you have a construction timeline, it doesn't end in, 1 month after the application is submitted. And again, we also look to see any construction or design documents you have at this point as well. For our feasibility review, this is where we look to see, how able your project actually is to be implemented based on the information connected in your application. This is where we consider your project financing. Do you have 50% or more of your total project costs already secured? Maybe you've already filed for a permit and have that permit application number ready to go. That's always helpful as well. We'll look to see a detailed business plan, leadership team summary, and then depending on how long your business has been in operation, either a profit and loss statement, financial stability statement, or a detailed plan for how your business is going to operate. The third stage here is a little bit more, abstract, and it's the community impact phase. So this is when we consider what the actual impact of your project is going to be in the surrounding neighborhood. Are you going to be filling a gap in amenities or services in the particular area you're in? So for example, if you're in a part of the city that has, 15 laundromats within a 3 mile radius and you're opening a 16th laundromat, you can understand how that sort of gap in amenities really isn't as clear because those services are already being provided. So how do we judge community impact? Well, we start by taking a look at any members of your community or older person that has written a letter of support. Typically, one of the things that I would say strengthens a letter of support is having the letter of support be specifically about your proposed project rather than just something about your organization in general. So if you have a letter of support from, a member of the community who says, I really think this kitchen build out that, XYZ applicant is providing would be beneficial for the community rather than, XYZ applicant is a business that I work with sometimes and they are in the community, you can understand how those letters of support really are very different. We'll also look to see if there's any details on a plan for community engagement or outreach. And we also recommend that you reach out to your older person. If you are able to obtain a letter of support, that can absolutely go a long way. The last phase here is due diligence. This is an interdepartmental review that we work alongside other departments at the City of Chicago to do a holistic review of your business and your application. So this is when we'll work with the city to determine whether or not there's any outstanding indebtedness that you have, whether that be from your legal entity or members of your leadership team or ownership team of your business. We'll also work to review whether or not your project is compliant with any zoning restrictions. We'll look to see that your business is in good standing with the state of Illinois and doesn't have any outstanding difficulties there. So, for the due diligence stage, what I would recommend is make sure you pay your parking tickets, make sure that your legal entity is renewed with the state of Illinois. Typically, you need to extend that registration once a year. So please make sure you cross your T's and dot your I's before you submit. It is important. So with all that being said, how do you actually apply for a CDGS grant? Well, you can start by going on the City of Chicago's submittable webpage. You'll see that there is currently an open application that, again, is due February 13th at 11:59 p.m. Make sure you review it all before you get started. Make sure you complete the entire form. When you actually start the application, you'll see kind of like an initial screen that asks you like 3 or 4 questions. That is not the entire application. So please make sure you complete those and then go on to the next page where you can see the full detailed questions you'll be asked to fill out. On that detailed portion of the application, again, we'll be looking to see design and construction documentation, site control documentation, any sort of proof of financing documentation you might have. That also includes business plans, financial statements, letter of community support. And again, please make sure that you double check your application and make sure that you are as thorough as possible. I'd say one of the best sort of tips and tricks we can give to prospective applicants is be thorough, completely answer each question, and double check before you submit to make sure that you've answered anything. I'll say it one more time. The applications are due 11:59 p.m. on February 13th, 2026. Unfortunately, no late applications can be submitted. This is just to ensure that the application review process is fair for everybody. Additionally, once your application is submitted, it's generally not possible for us to reopen an application. So please make sure that it's fully complete by the time that you submit.
I'll also add one last point. You will it is not a benefit to submit early. You are more than welcome to submit tomorrow if you'd like. But we are only going to start looking at applications after the deadline has passed. So feel free to kind of take the time, make sure that, the information that you're submitting to us is up to date as possible when you submit it. We're not going to be taking a look at it until February 14th and onwards. Okay. Thank you so much to everyone for your time. We are going to, and for submitting your questions. I think my colleague Alex is going to be picking out some questions and throwing it to the rest of the team live here. Alex, anything that you'd like to make sure that we cover?
Perfect. Thanks, Patrick. And thanks everyone for your patience and your attention throughout our webinar today. First, I'll throw to my colleague Hannah Jones at DPD for a few questions. Hannah, I'll read them off to you. beginning with Christopher's question regarding the medium and large DPD grants. Will there be webinars for those grants?
So those grants are handled by a separate bureau than our Small Business Development Bureau. So they do have different requirements. You can see the link that's on the screen right now, Chicago.gov/CDG. There you'll find resources for our large and medium programs. Keep in mind that because they are higher dollar amounts, they do have more requirements. But if you feel like that your project has a higher project cost and a larger grant would be more beneficial, please take a look at those resources. They do close at the same time as our small grants on February 13th at 11:59 p.m. So you only need to remember one deadline.
Awesome. Thank you, Hannah. An additional question here on commercial purchase of a retail space being an eligible cost under the CDGS grant.
The purchase of a retail space is an eligible cost. However, the grant is not solely for the purchase of spaces. It can be up to 25% of your total grant award can go towards acquisition of your space, but it needs to be tied to a broader development project such as rehabilitation or new construction. I'll also use this as an opportunity to answer the question on is new residential construction eligible? These are only for commercial business grants. No residential is qualifying.
Perfect. Thank you, Hannah. And then Patrick, I will throw to you for the question on the announcement timeline.
Yeah. There was a question in the chat that's basically when are you going to hear when can applicants expect to hear back about the whether their applications are successful or not. We try our best to kind of get through these as quickly as possible. This is a grant program with a lot of demand, and so it takes a while to kind of get through all the applications. I would say hopefully at some point in the summer, hopefully early summer, maybe whether that's is May or June realistic, maybe, Hannah?
I say we shoot for May. Sometimes it lands a little bit more towards June. We do try and be thorough with our review process, make sure we're awarding folks who we feel can make it to the finish line of their project. So we do have a lot of people reviewing these applications to assure that we are spending our publicly backed bond funding responsibly.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, we had another question about is this grant offered every year? It's offered twice a year, so it closes in every February and every August. So there will be 2 rounds per year of when we are awarding this grant. So it's a biannual grant.
Perfect. Thank you, Hannah. And then I think Elisa, there's a couple that we will go through here.
Yeah, so we're just going to highlight some of the ones that were already answered in the chat since they may be applicable to the wider group. Starting with Sarah's question for proof of financing, are you looking for approved loan applications if we don't currently have the cash in hand?
Perfect. So regarding proof of financing, when you apply for the grant, the reviewer team will look at any kind of proof of financing, financial documentation you provide, personal business bank statements, a line of credit, your approved loan amount or an application for a loan. As a reminder, a requirement for projects once selected is to show 50% proof of total project cost on hand, but that is not a requirement for the application. So we really encourage you to outline as much of your sort of financing capabilities in your original application.
All right, next question is from Jorge regarding income generating. We plan on leasing the commercial property and not conduct our personal business in it. Would this qualify?
Yes, so this grant is able to finance kind of permanent capital improvements to retail commercial units. You're able to, that is able to be eligible and lease out to tenants upon completion of the project.
And our last one from Chantel. I currently have a home-based daycare business, but looking to grow to a commercial space. Would I then be eligible for this grant?
Yeah, the answer is yes. So as long as the business is not operating out of your home, the commercial space would be eligible for this grant. Okay.
And I'd like to answer, we have a couple folks asking what the difference between the NOF and the community development grant are. So there are some minor minor differences in terms of like eligibility. So for instance, like daycares are not eligible under the NOF program. I would say the biggest difference is that the NOF program is location based. So there is a location eligibility requirement, whereas the community development grant, you just have to be a business in the city of Chicago. So if you are interested in applying for NOF, or you're interested in like determining if which one would be a better fit, you can always email dpdgrants@cityofchicago.org and we can advise you on which one might be the better fit for you all. Additionally, NOF is open 4 times a year, whereas CDG is only open twice a year.
Perfect. Thank you, Hannah. And then just a few questions that have come in with John's question regarding construction that's already started. Your construction cannot be complete until the end of the review process. So as my colleagues Patrick and Hannah mentioned, with an announcement date tentatively in the early summer, your construction cannot be complete by the early summer to be eligible for this grant. And then
a good general rule of thumb for city programs are if you've already completed the work, it is not eligible. So if you are planning on doing any sort of construction or projects, please, try and reach out to us before, so that way we can advise. It's also the reason why we've made these grants on a consistent schedule, as opposed to sort of more inconsistent as they were initially, so people can plan around when they could be awarded.
And then the question on startups. So as a reminder, this grant is reimbursement based, where once your project is selected for the program, the city will be able to reimburse up to 75% in eligible costs, with the owner or the business covering the outstanding 25% costs. Our teams are able to work with you, connect you with lenders, help you figure out your financing situation, but you are required on the front end to pay for the expenses you accrue throughout your construction.
Also, Alex, if I could add just one more additional note to that project financing question. Like we said earlier, this is a really common question. It's definitely, we understand that it's not necessarily easy to have that 50% total project cost already in secured project financing. Again, you're not automatically disqualified for not having that funding amount in your application. With that being said, though, it is ultimately a requirement of the CDGS program before you receive your disbursements. And then additionally, it really does go a long way in strengthening your application. So we do recommend, doing a little bit of work, talking with, different lenders or anything like that, to make sure that your project financing is in a strong enough situation. And like Hannah said, because this is a consistent grant program with multiple rounds that open, if you might not be ready to submit before the February 13th deadline, well, maybe it makes more sense for you to submit in the second round of funding for this year. So definitely something to keep in mind, and kind of think about how you're spacing out your project financing.
Perfect. Thank you, Kenny. Hannah, the question here on applying for both NOF and CDGS rounds.
So you can apply for both. Keep in mind they are 2 separate applications. You can apply for both, and let's say in a wonderful situation that you are awarded both, you do have to choose between one grant or the other. So you can apply for both, but you ultimately can only proceed with one.
Thank you, Hannah.
And then I'll answer Emily's question here. If you're a religious-based nonprofit but want to have suites for business owners and a coffee shop, are you eligible? As long as those suites that you're building out are revenue generating, you are eligible. So you can be a nonprofit. I think that's a great example of like a nonprofit that can apply and qualify, because the suites and the project that they will be doing is a revenue generating project for the organization. So we would consider that revenue generating.
Awesome. Thank you, Hannah. Patrick, I'll throw to you for the next question from John, discussing reimbursement along the way throughout a project. If reimbursement is when a project is complete, or are there payments along the way?
Yeah. So thanks for the question, John. I think big picture, no, a reimbursement doesn't, you don't need to wait until all your work is done before you get reimbursed. There are kind of checkpoints along the way that you'll be able to kind of receive your reimbursements at, and so those are tied to when you receive your permits, when your inspections are complete, once you open for business, being the last one. And so we, if you're selected for the program, we'll go through those in greater detail. But suffice to say, you are able to kind of receive intermediate payments between the start of your construction and when your business is up and running here.
Thank you, Patrick. And then Hannah, the question regarding lenders that DPD is able to connect potential applicants with regarding NOF or CDGS.
Yes, so if you just want to shoot us an email at the dpdgrants@cityofchicago.org, we do have a list of folks who are familiar with our programs and who have been great partners with helping our small businesses get off the ground with funding. So we can shoot that list over to anyone who might be interested. Just please shoot us an email at dpdgrants@cityofchicago.org.
Awesome. Thank you, Hannah. And thanks everyone for all of the questions you provided. If there are any sort of additional questions, individual project specific questions, we do encourage you to email dpdgrants@cityofchicago.org and we can answer your questions really thoroughly from there. I'll pass it back to Patrick then.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for your time and being here today. The recording of this presentation is going to be put up on the CDGS resources webpage, before too long. So if there's anything that we went through relatively quickly, you're able to go back to that recording and these slides to see that our specific description of that component of the application. Thanks, everyone. Once again, we're very excited to kind of look at all of your wonderful applications once they come in, after February 13th. Please don't miss that deadline. And we just appreciate all the wonderful work that you are doing for all Chicago residents here in our city. Hannah, any last thoughts before we break for today?
Yeah, no other thoughts. In terms of where successful apps are posted, we do post those to our website. So you can take a look at our DPD website and you'll see the folks who we've awarded in the past. But Happy New Year, everyone. Please have a safe 2026 and we'll chat soon. Thank you.
Thank you all.